In the Wyoming wind, a man with nothing left to lose made a choice. He saved a girl he didn't know from a monster who owned the town. He thought that was the end of it. But the next day, she showed up at his door with a request that would change everything. A request that would almost certainly get them both killed. And the lonely man said yes. Garrett Webb was a ghost. He haunted the livery stable in Thorn Ridge, a town clinging to life on the edge of the prairie. He was 30 years old, but his eyes were ancient, the color of a gathering storm. Most men his age had a wife, some land, a reason to wake up. Garrett had a horse, a bedroll, and a silence that kept the world at arm's length. He'd learned the hard way that caring about things, about people, was just an invitation for pain. So he kept to himself, shod horses, mended tack, and cashed his pay from the stable owner, a man named Prescott who was old enough not to ask questions. Garrett was invisible, and that's how he liked it. But you can't stay invisible forever. The trouble started just past noon. A shout from the general store, then the sound of splintering wood. Garrett looked up from a bridle he was mending and saw her. A young woman stumbling into the street, her dress torn, her auburn hair breaking free. Behind her was Roland Mackey, the cattle baron's son, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. He was the kind of man born with a silver spoon in his mouth and a devil on his shoulder. The woman tried to run, but her boot snagged on her skirt and she went down hard in the dust. Mackey was on her in a second, yanking her up by the arm. His voice was a vicious slur that carried across the street. "You think you can embarrass me? In front of the whole town? You're mine, Claudia. Been promised since you were 16. Garrett's hands went still. He watched as a dozen townsfolk suddenly found the storefronts fascinating. They turned their backs. They walked away. Because Roland Mackey's father didn't just own cattle. He owned the town. He owned the law. And crossing him was a death sentence for your livelihood, your land, or your life. Garrett knew the math. Survival meant looking the other way. He'd been doing it for years. But then the girl, Claudia, twisted in Mackey's grip. Her voice, laced with fear but sharp as glass, cut through the silence. "I never agreed to marry you. My father made that deal without asking me." The response was a crack that echoed like a gunshot. Mackey backhanded her across the face. Her head snapped to the side. When she looked back, blood was trickling from her lip. And in that moment, something inside Garrett Webb, something he thought had died a long time ago, broke wide open. He dropped the bridle. He started walking. His mind hadn't even caught up to his feet. He crossed the street, his boots kicking up dust, his eyes locked on Mackey. The younger man had Claudia by both arms now, shaking her like a rag doll. Garrett came up behind them, his voice low and quiet, but it cut through Mackey's drunken rant like a razor. "Let her go." Mackey spun around, pulling Claudia with him. He sneered, looking Garrett up and down, the drifter from the stable, the nobody. "This ain't your concern, horse shit. Go back to shoveling it." Garrett's expression was carved from stone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Let her go." Mackey's hand twitched, dropping toward the pistol on his hip. But he never had a chance. Garrett moved in a blur of motion that wasn't just fast. It was practiced. He caught Mackey's wrist, twisted it hard, and drove his other fist into the man's gut. Mackey folded, all the air leaving his lungs in a wet gasp. Garrett plucked the pistol from Mackey's holster and sent it sailing into a nearby water trough. He shoved Mackey backward, and the cattle baron's son landed hard in the dirt. Claudia just stood there, frozen, her hand covering her bleeding mouth. Her eyes, the color of honey and sunlight, were wide with shock. Garrett turned to her, his voice softening. "You hurt anywhere else?" She just shook her head. He nodded, then turned back to Mackey, who was staggering to his feet, murder in his eyes. A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the violence. Garrett ignored them. He spoke only to Mackey. "You're going to walk away. If I ever see you lay a hand on her again, we'll have a different conversation." Mackey spat a mouthful of blood and dirt. "You just signed your own death warrant. My father will have you hanging from a tree by sunset. A grim, cold smile touched Garrett's lips. "I've been dead before," he said. It didn't take. Mackie stumbled away, hurling threats over his shoulder. The crowd melted away just as fast, not wanting to be caught in the fallout. In minutes, the street was empty again. Just Garrett and Claudia. She finally found her voice, though it trembled. "Why? Why did you help me? No one else—" Garrett shrugged, already uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "Seemed like the right thing to do. The right thing gets people killed in this town." "Maybe," Garrett said, picking up his fallen hat. "But the wrong thing rots you from the inside out." He walked back toward the livery stable, telling himself it was over. He'd stepped in, he'd stepped out. He'd have to leave town by morning, before the Mackies could make good on their promise. It wasn't the first time he'd had to run. But as he tried to get back to work, his hands were shaking, and he couldn't get the image of her face out of his head. Bloodied, but not broken. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, and in one stupid, noble moment, he just kicked them all down. He thought he could just walk away from it. He had no idea how wrong he was. The afternoon sun bled across the Wyoming sky, painting everything in shades of orange and blood. Garrett worked on autopilot, every nerve screaming at him to saddle his horse and ride. But he stayed. Prescott, the old stable owner, finally came out of his office. He'd seen the whole thing from his doorway. "That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've seen in 40 years, the old man said, his voice raspy. "Probably stupid," Garrett replied, not looking up from the saddle he was oiling. "Mackie's father will have you killed for that. You should ride out tonight." "Probably should." Prescott shook his head. "But you won't, will you?" Garrett finally met his gaze. The old man wasn't judging him. He just looked weary, like he'd seen this story play out before. "That girl," Prescott continued. "She's been promised to Roland for years. Her father, Thomas Hartwell, got himself into a deep gambling debt with the elder Mackie. Settled it with a marriage contract. Claudia turns 20 in 2 weeks. That's when the wedding is supposed to happen. She doesn't want to marry him. What she wants doesn't matter much around here. The Mackies always get what they want." Garrett's jaw tightened. "That's wrong." "Lots of things are wrong," Prescott sighed. "Can't fix 'em all." "No," Garrett said, his voice dangerously quiet. "But I can fix this one." He knew it was a fool's errand. He was one man against a family that ran the territory. The smart play was to disappear. Let the world keep turning its cruel, unjust way. But as he closed up the stable for the night, he kept seeing Claudia's eyes. He saw the defiance in them, a spark that refused to go out. He ate a can of beans over a small fire behind the stable, his mind racing. His bedroll was laid out in the loft, his safe, lonely space. Tonight it felt like a cage. He was just banking the fire when he heard her footsteps. Claudia stepped out of the shadows. She'd cleaned herself up, changed her dress. Her hair was pinned back, but a few strands had escaped, framing a face that was beautiful even with a swollen, split lip. "I had to see you," she said quietly. Garrett stood up slowly, wary. "It's not safe for you to be here." "It's not safe anywhere," she countered, stepping into the firelight. "I wanted to thank you again. Properly. No one has ever stood up for me like that. You already thanked me." Garrett shifted, uneasy. Gratitude felt like a chain, and he'd spent his life breaking free of them. "Words aren't enough," she insisted. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not how I see it," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "You did what no decent man in this town had the courage to do." The silence between them crackled with things unsaid. He wanted to tell her to go, to leave him alone, to let him sink back into his ghost-like existence. But instead, he heard himself ask, "Why are you really here, Claudia?" Her composure cracked for a second. He saw a flicker of raw desperation in her eyes before she stamped it down. "Because I need more help," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And I think you're the only person in this world who might give it." "I already helped you." It's not enough, she said, taking a step closer. The firelight danced in her eyes. Roland will be back, tomorrow or the next day. And when he comes, no one will stop him. In 2 weeks, I'll be his wife. And I'll spend the rest of my miserable life trapped with a man who hits me in the street. I can't live like that. He saw the trap closing around him. He'd seen it before. Good intentions turning into a noose. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice rough. She held his gaze, and it felt like she was looking right into his soul. I want you to take me away from here. Tonight. Help me escape before they can stop us. His answer was immediate. No. Why not? Because running doesn't solve a damn thing. They'll hunt us. Mackie's father has men everywhere. When they catch us, and they will catch us, it'll be a hell of a lot worse for both of us. So what's your plan? She shot back, her voice rising with frustration. That I just stay here and accept it? Marry a man who treats me like cattle? He didn't have an answer. He knew she was right. A woman alone on the frontier was a lamb in a wolf den. But what she was asking him to throw away his life, his solitude, his very survival, for a stranger. Every instinct screamed at him to say no. But then he looked at her face, at the desperation and the defiance all mixed together, and he saw himself. He saw the same loneliness, the same feeling of being trapped. He remembered what it felt like to be drowning, with no one to throw you a rope. I can't just take you away, he said finally, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. But I might be able to do something else. Hope flared in her eyes. What? Give me until morning. Let me think. If there's a way out of this that doesn't end with us both in a shallow grave, I'll try to find it. It wasn't the promise she wanted, but it was more than anyone else had ever offered. She studied his face, then nodded slowly. Until morning. She turned to go, then paused. Garrett, thank you. Just for thinking about it. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the darkness. Garrett stood by the dying fire, the Wyoming wind cold on his skin. He had just promised to dive headfirst into a problem that was only going to end in blood. The smart part of him, the part that had kept him alive this long, was screaming that he was a fool. But another part, a part he thought he'd buried years ago with his wife, whispered that maybe, just maybe, some things were worth dying for. He slept in the loft, but his dreams were filled with fire and smoke, and the face of a woman he couldn't save. He woke before dawn, the ghost of her memory clinging to him. He hadn't been able to save his wife. He hadn't been able to save his old life. But maybe he could save this one girl. And if it cost him everything he had left, well, that wasn't much anyway. He had a plan. It was insane. It was reckless. And it was the only thing he could think of. He wasn't going to run. He was going to fight. Not with a gun. Not yet. With money. The sun was just beginning to touch the dusty streets of Thorn Ridge when Garrett walked to the Hartwell house. It was a small, sad-looking place on the edge of town. He knocked. The door opened to reveal a man with tired eyes and the slumped shoulders of someone who'd lost too many fights with life. Thomas Hartwell, Claudia's father. What do you want? Hartwell asked, his eyes full of suspicion. To talk about your daughter. Hartwell's face soured. You're the one. The drifter who beat up Roland Mackie. You need to leave before you get us all killed. He tried to shut the door. Garrett put a hand on it, stopping him cold. I'm here to make you an offer. He stepped inside. Claudia was standing by the back window, her expression a mix of hope and terror. Garrett ignored her for a moment, focusing on her father. I know about the debt, Garrett said, his voice flat. The one you settled by promising your daughter to Mackie. Hartwell flushed with shame. It's a family arrangement. No, Garrett cut him off. It's a sale. So tell me the price. How much do you owe? The older man stammered, then named a figure. It was a huge sum, enough to crush a man like Hartwell, but not an impossible one. I'll pay it, Garrett said. The words dropped into the silence of the tiny house like a bomb. Claudia gasped. Her father stared at Garrett as if he'd grown a second head. "You're crazy," Hartwell whispered. "You're a stable hand. Where would you get that kind of money?" Garrett didn't say a word. He just reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch. He untied it and poured a stack of bills onto the rickety table. It was everything he had in the world. Money he'd scraped together over 10 years of drifting and back-breaking work. Money he'd been saving for a future he never really believed would come. "This covers it," Garrett said. "And then some." Hartwell's hands trembled as he reached for the money. His eyes were wide with disbelief and a dawning, terrible greed. He looked from the cash to Garrett, then to his daughter. "Why?" Hartwell breathed. "What's in it for you?" Garrett glanced at Claudia. She was frozen, her eyes shining with tears. He looked back at her father. "Because no one should be sold, and because your daughter deserves to make her own choices. The Mackeys, they won't just accept this," Hartwell stammered. "That's their problem," Garrett said. "Once the debt is paid, the contract is void. You owe them nothing. She owes them nothing." A long, tense silence filled the room. Hartwell looked at the money, then at Claudia. Garrett could see the war in the man's eyes, the fear of the Mackeys versus the allure of all that cash. Claudia finally moved, her voice trembling but strong. "Papa, take the money, please. Let me be free." Slowly, almost painfully, Hartwell nodded. "All right," he whispered. "God help us all. All right." Garrett felt a wave of relief wash over him. He'd just spent his life savings on a woman he'd known for less than a day. He couldn't explain it, not really. But seeing the look on Claudia's face, a look of pure, unadulterated hope, he didn't regret it for a second. Hartwell snatched up the money and practically ran out the door, promising to go straight to the Mackey ranch and settle the debt with a witness. Garrett stayed with Claudia, the two of them standing in the silent house, the air thick with unspoken questions. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice soft. "Why would you do that for me?" He turned to look at her. "Maybe I got tired of saving for a future that was never coming." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. He felt like she could see right through him, past all the walls he'd built. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing." "Nobody does something like this for nothing." "I do," he said. They were standing only a few feet apart, but the space between them felt charged, electric. He broke eye contact first, turning back to the window to watch the street. "When your father gets back, you need to stay inside. This isn't over. Roland Mackey won't take this lying down. What about you? I'll handle it. You can't fight the whole Mackey family alone. It won't be the first time I've been outnumbered." Her hand touched his arm. A small, light touch, but it burned like a brand. "I won't let you do this alone," she said. "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do," she shot back, her chin lifting. "You just bought me my freedom, and I choose to use it to stand with you." Before he could argue, the door flew open, and Thomas Hartwell stumbled back in, his face pale as a ghost. He threw the empty money pouch on the table. "It's done," he panted. "The debt is paid. The contract is void. She's free." Tears streamed down Claudia's face as she sank onto a bench, smiling through them. Garrett watched her, a tight knot in his own chest. He had freed her. But he had also painted a giant target on both of their backs. He was right about one thing. This was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. But what Garrett didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that the danger wasn't just coming from the Mackeys. The real threat was standing right there in the room with them. Garrett and Claudia spent the rest of the morning in a state of anxious limbo. Hartwell claimed the elder Mackey had been furious, but had accepted the payment in front of the witness, legally voiding the marriage contract. He said they were in the clear. But Garrett's gut told him a different story. He went back to the livery stable to gather his few belongings. Prescott took one look at his face. "You did it, didn't you? You crazy son of a gun, you paid her debt." "I did." "You're either the noblest fool I've ever met, or you have a death wish." "Time will tell," Garrett said, packing his saddlebags. A change of clothes, a razor, his grandfather's old watch. His whole life fit into 2 leather bags. He was checking his horse's shoes when Claudia appeared in the stable doorway. She was dressed for travel, a small bag slung over her shoulder. "I'm coming with you," she announced. Garrett straightened up. "No, you're not." "Yes, I am. It's not safe for me in Thornridge anymore. It's not safe for you either. We both know the Mackeys won't let this go." "Then you go your way, and I'll go mine. You're free now, Claudia. Go live your life." "I want to live it with you," she said, the words hanging in the air between them. He shook his head, a war raging inside him. "That's a bad idea. I'm not good company." Her expression hardened. "Didn't you just spend every penny you have to give me the right to choose? Well, I'm choosing. Don't you dare take that away from me now." She had him. He couldn't argue with her logic. And if he were honest with himself, a part of him, a lonely, broken part, desperately wanted her to come. That terrified him more than a dozen Mackeys. Just as he was about to give in, the sound of hooves thundered down the street. 6 riders, moving fast. At their center was Roland Mackey, his face a twisted mask of pure hatred. Garrett instinctively moved to the stable door, pushing Claudia back into the shadows. "Stay here." Mackey and his men reined in, surrounding the stable. "You made a fatal mistake, Drifter," Mackey snarled, swinging down from his horse. "The debt is paid, Mackey. She's free. You have no claim." Mackey spat in the dirt. "My father made a deal. No drifter with a lucky stash of cash gets to undo it. The boss says the wedding happens as planned, debt or no debt." His hand hovered over his pistol. Garrett's own gun was in his hand before he even thought about it, the hammer clicking back with a sound like the gates of hell opening. Every one of Mackey's men froze. "Don't," Garrett warned, his voice a low growl. The standoff was so thick you could cut it with a knife, 6 guns to 1. The odds were impossible. Garrett was ready to die right there. But then, a new voice cut in. "That's enough, Roland." Marshal Benjamin Cross rode into the middle of the standoff, his badge gleaming in the sun. He was a hard man, respected in Thornridge. He sat his horse between Garrett and the Mackey men. "You and your boys ride out, now." "This doesn't concern the law, Marshal," Mackey protested. "It does when you bring 6 armed men to terrorize my town. I was there. I saw the papers. The debt is settled. The contract is void. It's over." The Marshal's tone was iron. Mackey glared at Garrett, his eyes promising murder, but he holstered his weapon. He mounted his horse. "This isn't over," he hissed. Then he pointed a finger at Garrett. "Watch your back, Drifter. We'll be waiting." And with that, they rode out of town. As the dust settled, Marshal Cross turned to Garrett. "That was a fool thing you did, Webb, but it was the right thing. Now listen to me. You can't stay here. They'll be back. They'll wait until I'm not around and they'll kill you. You and the girl. Get your things, and be gone before sunset. You've got 6 hours, maybe less. Ride north. Don't stop." It was the only advice that made sense. Claudia emerged from the shadows, her face pale. Within the hour, they were on the road, 2 horses, a handful of supplies, and a world of trouble behind them. They rode hard, pushing north, away from Thornridge, away from the Mackeys. As night fell, they made a small, hidden camp. Across the flames of the fire, Claudia looked at him. "Thank you, Garrett, for everything." "You can stop thanking me." "I don't think I ever can. You gave up your whole life for a stranger." He poked at the fire. "Maybe I was tired of that life anyway. Drifting, running, being alone." He looked at her. "What were you running from?" he asked, realizing he knew nothing about her past. She was quiet for a long moment. "The same thing as you, I suppose. A ghost." "What ghost?" "My mother," she said softly. "She died when I was 16. My father, he changed after that. Started drinking, gambling. He was a good man once. But the grief broke him. The debt he owed Mackey, it was because of her. Doctor's bills he could never pay. He sold me to pay for my dead mother." The story hit Garrett harder than any fist. He finally understood. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same pain he carried in his own heart. He told her about his wife, about the fire, about the failure that had haunted him for a decade. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone with his ghosts. They rode for 3 days, the empty plains their only companion. They talked for hours, the walls between them crumbling with every mile. He discovered she was smart, and funny, and tougher than anyone he'd ever known. She discovered that beneath his stony exterior was a man with a dry wit and a good heart. On the 4th day, they reached Fort Collins. It felt like a different world, bustling, alive. Garrett paid for 2 separate rooms at a boarding house. That night, they ate a hot meal in a noisy saloon. For the first time, it felt like they might actually be safe, like they might have a future. "What now?" Claudia asked. "We can't run forever." "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess we find a place far enough away that the name Mackie doesn't mean anything, and we start over." "We?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yeah," he said, meeting her eyes. "We." It was in that moment, with the smell of fried bacon and cheap whiskey in the air, that he realized he was in love with her. The thought was so terrifying, so overwhelming, he almost couldn't breathe. He had just started to say something else when the saloon doors burst open. A young man stumbled in, bleeding from a cut on his head. He was panicked, shouting, "Riders! A dozen of them! They're tearing the town apart, asking about a drifter and a woman with auburn hair." Garrett was on his feet in a heartbeat. His blood ran cold. It wasn't just Roland. It was the whole damn Mackie army, and Marshal Cross had sent them right to him. The advice to ride north wasn't a warning. It was a trap. "Get your things, now!" Garrett grabbed Claudia's arm, pulling her toward the stairs. They raced to their rooms, snatched their bags, and scrambled out the back window just as the front door of the boarding house splintered under a heavy boot. They dropped into the alley below and ran. They could hear shouts behind them, the sound of Mackie's men ransacking the building. Their destination was the livery stable, 3 blocks away. But when they got there, 2 guards were posted out front. The Mackies had thought of everything. "This way," Garrett whispered, pulling her around back to the corral. In the darkness, he slipped the ropes off 2 horses, boosting Claudia onto one and swinging onto the other himself. They were bareback, no time for saddles. A shout went up from the front of the stable. They'd been spotted. Garrett kicked his horse into a gallop, and they burst out of the corral, thundering through the back streets of Fort Collins. Bullets whined past their ears, splintering wood on the buildings around them. The chase was on. They fled into the open prairie, the sound of their pursuers a terrifying drumbeat behind them. They rode until the horses were lathered and gasping, finally putting some distance between them and the town. Garrett slowed to a walk, listening to the night sounds. "Are they gone?" Claudia asked, her voice ragged. "For now. But they'll pick up our trail at dawn. The marshal told them exactly where we were going. He sold us out." The betrayal was a bitter pill. There was no law on their side, no one to trust. It was just the 2 of them against the world. "So we keep running?" she asked. He looked at her in the moonlight, at her determined, beautiful face. Adrenaline and fear had made her eyes bright. "No," he said, his voice hard as iron. "We stop running. We start fighting. We find a place to make a stand, on our terms. That's suicide, Garrett. Maybe. But it's better than spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. I know a place. A box canyon, 2 days from here. It's defensible. If we can get there first, we might just have a chance." She didn't hesitate. She just nodded. "Then let's go." They pushed the horses through the night, a desperate, grueling race against the rising sun. At dawn, they paused to let the animals drink from a stream, and Claudia saw it first. A faint cloud of dust on the southern horizon. "They're coming," she said. The chase became a brutal test of endurance. Garrett pushed them relentlessly, using every trick he knew to cover their trail, to gain a few precious minutes. They rode through rocky terrain, followed stream beds, used every fold in the land to stay out of sight. But the dust cloud was always there, a persistent, deadly promise. By the second night, they were running on fumes. The horses were stumbling with exhaustion. Garrett was starting to think they wouldn't make it. Then he saw it. a jagged rock formation that looked like a broken tooth against the starry sky. His landmark. "We're close," he grunted. Just before the sun rose, they found the entrance to the canyon. It was a narrow slit in the rock, barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. Inside, it opened up into a wide, sandy area with sheer rock walls on 3 sides and a small stream trickling from the stone. It was a natural fortress, a perfect trap. The only question was, for who? As the sun's first rays hit the canyon rim, Garrett got to work. He used fallen rocks to build a crude barricade across the entrance. Claudia took the horses deeper into the canyon, giving them water and letting them rest. When he was done, Garrett checked his weapons. 1 revolver, a rifle, and about 50 rounds of ammunition between them. Not nearly enough. Claudia came up behind him. "I can shoot," she said quietly. "My father taught me before he changed." Garrett pulled his spare pistol from his saddlebag and handed it to her. "Stay behind cover. Don't waste a single bullet." They didn't have to wait long. An hour after sunrise, a dozen riders appeared at the canyon mouth. Roland Mackey dismounted, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He walked forward alone, his hands empty. "Nowhere left to run, drifter," he called out. "It's over. You're trapped like rats." Garrett stood up slowly from behind the barricade, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm. "Then come and get us, Mackey!" Mackey's face contorted with rage. "Oh, we will! We're gonna kill you slow, and then we're gonna take Claudia back where she belongs." "A lot of your men are going to die trying," Garrett called back. "Are you sure your pride is worth that?" He saw a flicker of doubt in Mackey's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by arrogance. "Last chance. Send the girl out, and we'll let you ride away." Garrett didn't answer. He just raised his rifle and aimed it squarely at Roland Mackey's chest. The message was clear. Mackey scrambled back to his men, shouting orders. The fight began. 4 men came at them on foot, using the rocks for cover, bullets ricocheting around Garrett and Claudia. Garrett held his fire, waiting. He let them get closer, let them get confident. Then he squeezed the trigger. His first shot took the lead man down. The others scattered. Beside him, Claudia fired her pistol, a deliberate, careful shot that sent another man scrambling away, clutching his arm. The first assault was over, but they had only 11 men left to deal with. A long, tense stalemate set in. The sun beat down, turning the canyon into an oven. Garrett knew they couldn't win a war of attrition. They were low on ammo, and the Mackeys had all the time in the world. He scanned the canyon walls, searching for a way out. And then he saw it. A series of small ledges on the right-hand wall, leading all the way up to the rim. It would be a dangerous, terrifying climb, but it was their only shot. He whispered the plan to Claudia. She looked at the sheer rock face, then back at him, her eyes wide with fear. But she nodded. As twilight fell, they made their move. They crept to the base of the wall and began to climb, finding handholds and footholds in the deepening shadows. It was slow, agonizing work. Halfway up, a shout from below told them they'd been discovered. Gunshots erupted. Bullets sparked off the rock around them, sending chips of stone flying. Garrett scrambled faster, pulling himself over the rim and then reaching down to haul Claudia up beside him. They were out. They ran along the canyon rim until they were directly above the Mackeys' camp. The men were gathered around a fire, confident their prey was still trapped below. Garrett took aim, not at a man, but at a wooden crate next to the fire. He knew it was filled with bottles of whiskey. His shot shattered the crate. Alcohol splashed into the fire, which erupted in a giant whoosh of flame. Men screamed and jumped back. In the confusion, Claudia fired near the hobbled horses. The terrified animals broke free and scattered into the night. Chaos reigned in the camp below, and in that chaos, Garrett and Claudia slipped away into the darkness. They ran until their lungs burned, finally collapsing behind a cluster of rocks miles away. They had done it. They had escaped. Claudia started laughing, a wild, breathless sound of pure relief. When her laughter died down, she reached out and took his hand. They sat there for a long time, just holding on to each other, the silence speaking volumes. "What now?" she finally asked. He squeezed her hand. Now, we find a town so far off the map, the name Mackie has never been spoken, and we start over. Together. He turned to face her, his heart in his throat. If that's what you want. I know this has been crazy, but somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to be alone. If you'll have me, Claudia, I'd like to see where this goes. Her answer was to lean in and kiss him. It was soft and desperate and full of every promise they didn't have the words for. I'd like that too, she whispered. They made their way north, traveling for weeks, always careful, but no longer running. They ended up in a small Montana settlement called Redemption. It was little more than a wide spot in the road, nestled in a green valley, as far from Wyoming as they could get. It was a place for people looking to start over. It was perfect. Garrett, with his strong back and skilled hands, found work as the town blacksmith. Claudia, with her sharp mind and gentle spirit, became the new schoolteacher. They rented a tiny house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. It was a home. 6 months after they arrived, they were married by the town's traveling preacher. Claudia wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself. Garrett wore his cleanest shirt and looked both terrified and happier than he'd ever been in his life. He had saved her from a monster, and in doing so, she had saved him from himself. The next morning, Claudia woke to find Garrett making coffee, sunlight streaming through their small kitchen window. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice low. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and full of love. "Not a single one." They stood there, watching the sunrise over their new life. They thought the past was finally behind them. They thought they were safe. They had no idea that the deadliest threat they'd ever faced wasn't a Mackie. It was a ghost from Garrett's own past, and he was already on his way. Life in Redemption was quiet. It was peaceful. After the chaos of their escape, the simple rhythm of their days felt like a dream. Garrett's forge became the heart of the town, his hammer fall a steady beat from dawn till dusk. Claudia's schoolhouse was filled with the laughter of children learning to read. They were building a life, a real one, piece by piece. The ghosts of Wyoming began to fade. The name Mackie became a distant memory, a story from another lifetime. They were no longer the drifter and the runaway. They were Garrett and Claudia Webb, respected members of their small community. One evening in late autumn, as they sat on their porch watching the leaves turn to gold, Garrett found himself thinking about his past. Not just the Mackies, but everything that came before. The fire. His first wife, Eleanor. The life he had lost. For the first time, he could think about it without the crushing weight of guilt. Claudia had healed something in him he thought was shattered forever. He was about to tell her this, to try and find the words for the peace she had brought him, when they saw a rider approaching. It wasn't unusual for strangers to pass through Redemption, but there was something about this one. He rode a big black horse and sat tall in the saddle, moving with a kind of predatory confidence that set Garrett's teeth on edge. The man rode straight to their house, dismounted, and stopped at the foot of their porch steps. He was older than Garrett, with a weathered face and cold, calculating eyes. He wore a fine coat and 2 matched pistols on his hips. He looked Garrett up and down, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Well, I'll be damned," the stranger said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Garrett Webb, I heard you were dead." Garrett stood up slowly, moving so Claudia was behind him. He didn't recognize the man, but he recognized the danger. It rolled off him in waves. "You have me at a disadvantage," Garrett said, his hand hovering near the hammer he'd left on the porch rail. The man chuckled. "You don't remember me? That hurts, Webb. That truly does. The name's Silas Kane. We rode together years back, before you decided to play homesteader, before the fire." The name hit Garrett like a physical blow. Silas Kane. A man from his old life. A life he had never ever spoken of to Claudia. He had been a bounty hunter, a man who lived by the gun, and Silas Kane had been his partner. He was a ruthless, cold-blooded killer. Garrett had broken away from that life after he met Eleanor, hoping to leave it behind forever. "What do you want, Silas?" Garrett asked, his voice tight. "I heard a story," Silas said, his eyes flicking to Claudia for a moment. "About a blacksmith in Montana who used to be a real fast gun. A man who took on the whole Mackey clan and won. Figured it had to be you. So I came to see for myself, and to offer you a job. I'm not in that line of work anymore." "Oh, I think you will be," Silas said with a smirk. "See, I'm putting a crew together. We're going after a big score, an army payroll wagon. There's a fortune on it, but it's well guarded. I need the best. I need you." "The answer is no." Silas's smile faded. "That's a shame. Because I wasn't really asking." He took a step closer. "You owe me, Garrett. Remember that bank job in Laramie? The one that went bad? The law was looking for 2 men, but they only ever got a name for one of them. Me. I did 5 years in a federal prison because you disappeared. You ran, and left me to take the fall." "I left that life behind," Garrett said through gritted teeth. "I had nothing to do with that job. Doesn't matter. You owe me, and you're going to pay. You're going to ride with me. Or—" Silas let his gaze drift to Claudia again, his meaning clear and ugly. "Your new life is going to come to a very sudden, very fiery end, just like your last one." The threat was unmistakable. Garrett felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This wasn't like the Mackeys. Roland was a bully, his father a tyrant. But Silas Kane was a snake, a venomous, patient predator who knew all of Garrett's secrets. Because Silas was the one who had set the fire that killed Eleanor. Garrett had always blamed himself. He thought it was an accident, a stray ember from the hearth. But the truth, the horrible, buried truth, was that Silas had done it as a warning to Garrett for leaving the gang. He'd made it look like an accident, and Garrett, consumed by grief, had never suspected. Until now, seeing the look in Silas's eyes, it all came crashing down on him. "It was you," Garrett whispered, the realization stealing his breath. "The fire. You killed her." Silas just smiled, that cold, dead smile. "She was holding you back. I did you a favor. Now you've got a choice to make. Ride with me, or I burn this pretty little life to the ground with your new wife inside." That night, after Silas had gone, promising to return in 2 days for Garrett's answer, the truth came out. Garrett told Claudia everything. About his life as a bounty hunter, a gun for hire, about Silas Kane, about the murder of his first wife. He laid his ugly, violent past at her feet, expecting her to run, to look at him with disgust. But she didn't. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she took his hand. "That was another man," she said firmly. "That's not who you are now. You're Garrett Webb, my husband, the blacksmith. A good man. But he's going to destroy all of this, Claudia. He'll kill you to get to me." "No," she said, her eyes flashing with that same defiance he'd seen in the street in Thorn Ridge. "He won't, because we're not going to let him. We beat the Mackeys. We'll beat him too." "How? I can't fight him and his whole crew alone." "You're not alone," she said, her voice filled with steel. "You have me, and you have this town." The next day, Garrett did something he had never done before. He asked for help. He went to the mayor, the saloon owner, the ranchers whose tools he had mended. He told them everything. He told them a snake was coming to their peaceful town, and that he meant to burn it down. He told them he understood if they wanted him to leave, to take his trouble with him. But the people of Redemption were not the people of Thorn Ridge. They didn't turn their backs. The mayor, a stout man named Abernathy, looked Garrett in the eye. "You're one of us now, Mr. Webb. Your trouble is our trouble." When Silas Kane and his 5 men rode into Redemption 2 days later, expecting Garrett to fall in line, they didn't ride into a sleepy, defenseless town. They rode into an ambush. The fight was fast and brutal. The men of Redemption, armed with hunting rifles and shotguns, fired from rooftops and windows. Kane's gang was caught completely by surprise. Garrett, moving with a speed and precision he hadn't used in years, faced Silas in the middle of the street. It wasn't a duel. It was an execution. Silas went for his gun, But Garrett was faster. His shot was true. The man who had destroyed his first life, the ghost who had come to haunt his second, fell dead in the Montana dust. When the smoke cleared, it was over. Silas Kane and his gang were gone. The town of Redemption had stood its ground. Garrett stood over Silas's body, the smoking pistol still in his hand. He felt nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. Just emptiness. The violence of his past had finally been put to rest, but the cost was high. He had brought death to this peaceful town. He turned to walk back to his house, to Claudia, ready to pack his bags and leave, to spare them any more of his poison. But the whole town was standing there. Mayor Abernathy clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, son. You saved us all." He looked around at the faces of his neighbors. He saw no fear, no judgment, only respect and gratitude. He had finally found a place where he wasn't a ghost. He was home. He walked back to his house. Claudia was waiting on the porch. She didn't say a word. She just opened her arms, and he walked into them, finally letting go of the last of his demons. A few weeks later, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Claudia told him she had some news. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said, her eyes shining. Joy, fierce and bright and terrifying, surged through him. A new life, a new beginning, born from the ashes of the old. It wasn't just a new chapter. It was a whole new book. That spring, Claudia gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They sat in their small house, the sounds of the town drifting through the open window, the baby sleeping in Claudia's arms. "What should we name her?" Claudia whispered. Garrett looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the life they had built against all odds. He thought of all the pain, all the running, all the fighting, and he thought of the peace he had finally found. "Hope," he said. "Let's name her Hope." He had spent a decade running from the man he used to be. But in saving Claudia, in facing down the Mackeys, and in finally confronting the ghosts of his own past, he had done more than just survive. He had found redemption. And he realized that home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built, something you fought for, something you defended with everything you had. He looked at his family, and he knew he would never be alone again. If you enjoyed this story of a man who found his way back from the brink, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next strange, dark, and mysterious story we have waiting in the shadows for you.